Rome, the eternal city. But what you see is only the tip of the iceberg. Under this bustling modern metropolis is the remains of another eternal city, entombed underground since the fall of Rome.
Today, when we walk through the city of Rome, underneath every single building that exists within those walls, there is something ancient underneath it.
These are dark, hidden places. Homes, sanctuaries, roads, aqueducts, each filled with wonders and challenges. This is the story of a city you thought you knew, and of a team of dedicated people working to unlock its deepest secrets. It's a journey through time, as we take you places few have seen, and where fewer still dare to go. Travel deep into Rome's underworld, and find beauty in the most unlikely of places, all in the name of discovery. Unearth what lies beneath.
Rome is the largest open-air museum in the world, and that's without even going underground. So underground is even richer.
Dr. Darius Aria is one of the leading archaeologists working to uncover Rome's past.
Whenever you dig in the city of Rome, you find something ancient. There's a house, there's a piazza, there are porticos, there's a temple, there's a shrine, there's a fountain, there are insulae, the apartment buildings. So many more layers of history are going to be unpeeled, and we have just scratched the surface.
The entire city of ancient Rome is hidden underground. Thousands of acres of buried history. How is this possible?
The ground level of Rome has been steadily rising over the past 3,000 years. In some places up to 60 feet. And it was happening not because every couple of decades they said let's jack up the city, but because there was a devastating flood, earthquakes, or there was a devastating fire. The debris that accumulates from the destruction, they leave that material there, level it off, they fill it in, and they go up.
Now, Rome's past is being rediscovered, but the underground is notoriously unstable and unsafe.
When you have these archaeological explorations underground, many times the archaeologist has to call upon a specialist called a speleoarchaeologist, like the people of Roma Sotterranea. The skills that they have are not the skills of your average archaeologist. That is, when you sign up to become an archaeologist, it's part of the studies is not rappelling. They can get to places that a lot of the scholars are not going to be able to get at. They're also going to be able to do things like scuba dive and go through some of the channels that are still filled with water. And it's extremely dangerous work. It's not for the average person, but for someone that has spent a lot of time in training, in climbing, in rappelling, and so forth.
Adriano Moravito is one of the founders of Roma Sotterranea.
Basically, all the undergrounds were seen as places where it was difficult to go, and most of the time they were studied from the outside. What we thought was that instead, in most of these places, you can really go in and check personally what's going on there, what's there, what are the archaeological remains. And this is basically the gap that we really filled. I must tell you that we were really very surprised to know that there was no one else doing what we started to do. The people that are involved in Roma Sotterranea are all kind of people. That is not something that we do as a job, but we do as a passion. The undergrounds of Rome, I think, have such a personality, and they really fascinate so much. And suddenly you are like in a lift that goes back in time. You are in a completely different world. Basically, most of the time is mapping of this underground. The archaeologists, they don't know what's there. So what we do is a mapping with some technical instruments.
L'angolo?
You really want to do this not just for the pleasure of doing it, but because you know that in this way you will just add a small piece in the big mosaic of what is the knowledge of ancient Rome. After you experience that, you want always to go forward and to have the chance of exploring more.
È bellissimo.
Ancient Rome was a city of about 3,000 acres, all contained within the Aurelian walls, built between 271 and 275 AD. Within these walls, hundreds of archaeological sites are documented. Yet the number of unknown sites covered by newer structures is countless.
When you go to an underground site, you're not just getting one period, you're getting multiple periods, and then in a given area or a given story of a structure, you can get centuries and centuries, even 1,000 years of use of a particular space. And that's what makes it so rich. The Basilica of San Clemente is extremely important because it illustrates all the layers of history of ancient Rome. The Basilical Church of San Clemente is 12th century that we're standing in right now. It in turn is on top of the remains of a 5th century church, which in turn is on top of extensive Roman ruins, a Roman house, alleyway, Mithraeum, and warehouse. We're standing in the middle zone of the San Clemente site, the second level. This church is truncated for the creation of the second church of San Clemente. This church was slightly larger than the 12th century church of San Clemente above us. They decided to lop it off at a certain point, and you can see the frescoes that are basically cutting off a lot of the figures. Around the 1890s, excavations are conducted by the Irish Dominicans, and they rediscovered this earlier church. It's just extraordinary to walk into the church, walk down to the remains of the early church that are buried, and then to walk through that down to a Roman house, and a Roman warehouse and a worship area of the god Mithras. To find a site like this that illustrates all those layers of history in Rome, really nothing is better than what we have here in San Clemente.
The undergrounds of Rome, you really explore a secret undiscovered world. You have an incredible range of things that you can discover. Is from the little marble bits or glass bits to the huge monuments still hidden under modern buildings. At the end of 2004, we were called by the Superintendenza Archeologica. They told us that they found a big room, and the chance to go in was given by an opening on the big ceiling. We used the ropes, and we found ourselves in this huge hall, very deep, and in the middle of one of these big walls there was this incredible mosaic. You really feel privileged, because you understand that no one saw that thing for centuries, and we were able to film it. Right after that, we went out, and we had all the archaeologists around us asking, what did you see? What did you see? How it looks like? And we said, wait, we will show it to you. I really can remember, as it was yesterday, that there were some of the archaeologists almost crying. I mean, I'm sure that if you go in a museum, you will see things as beautiful as this. But it's the adrenaline that you have in that specific moment when you see it for the first time, and you understand that you are the first one to see it, that really makes a difference. The people that are involved in Roma Sotterranea are all kinds of people.
And we like to have this sort of adventure, you know. I started to go underneath for studying, and it was very nice, but people doesn't understand me. Even my mommy, every time I get out, say, phone me please when you are outside now. But it's not dangerous, because we go all together, never alone. So this is important, and it's quite fine.
Here in these underground sites, it's immediately intimate. We get a sense of daily life, what the people were doing, and once again, we're thinking about a vibrant city, we're thinking of a teeming metropolis, and we're thinking of a population density not like New York City, but like Calcutta.
We are now 9 meters below the modern street level, as we can hear from the noise and how busy it is on top. And probably here it was even noisier and busier in the ancient times. So we have to imagine that there was a road here, narrow road, with a lot of people going back and forth, because we are in the city center of Rome. These buildings facing these roads had on the ground level the taberne, means shops. On top of this was high-rise building of the ancient times, probably 5 or 7 stories high. There were people living in really very bad conditions. This is the average size of an apartment in ancient Rome. We can see that the size was really small. There was a proper wall here, closing the light coming from the outside, and the only light was coming from these openings that were bringing also some air. And then obviously there was the entry door. A whole family was living here. They were eating here, they were sleeping all together. There was a bed made of bricks with some straws on top. And the whole life was in this small area.
Most Romans lived in the center of the city because, of course, that was the most convenient place to live. Juvenal and Martial were two satirists who lived in the last part of the 1st century AD, and they lived in apartments in Rome, and they have a lot of complaints about living in their apartments, and then, of course, also about living in the city and the hazards and the annoyances of living in the city. So Juvenal complains that you could live on the top floor of an apartment building and it could be on fire and you wouldn't know that the building was on fire, and of course that was one of the hazards. As you can imagine, because the cheapest apartment buildings included a lot of wood, and the buildings were close together, and if there was a fire it would have been very hard to put out the fire.
Living in Rome today is in a sense like living in ancient times. The buildings are old, the streets impossibly narrow, and your apartment most likely 5 stories up with no elevator. But it's Rome. The opportunities it offers make everything else worthwhile. The original megacity, Rome had the luxury of being able to afford to rebuild.
Rome is unique in that the Romans living here with so much wealth wanted the best. And the best, what was the best? The paintings, the wine, the sculpture, marble, metal, jewelry collections. All that wealth then becomes concentrated in the hands of the few, and finally when we have an emperor that's able to acquire these collections, he is making them available to the public. That's why the city is so densely packed with the porticos and the piazzas and the libraries and the museum spaces. And then as the city is affected by a flood, devastated by an earthquake, razed to the ground by a fire, there's still all that wealth. They're able to rebuild again and again and again, like no other city.
Evidence of Rome rebuilding is apparent throughout the city, if you know where to look. Beneath this church of San Giovanni e Paolo, excavations have revealed stunning examples of the wealthy lifestyles of Rome's elite.
Life was certainly different for the upper class than from the majority of people who lived in the apartment buildings. The wealthy had much larger houses, and since the wealthy might be allowed, in fact, usually were allowed to tap into the public water system and have pipes leading into their own houses, they had running water and they could have fountains, often beautifully decorated with mosaics. And some of the houses even had their own private baths.
We are now in the lowest level of the Roman houses under the Church of Santi Giovanni and Paolo. And this was the house of a very wealthy person. Why we can say this one is because we are now in the baths of this house. So these were the private baths of this mansion. This was the hot room of the baths, and we can see this by the structures that are under the floor. And we can also still find here these hollow bricks that were giving the chance to the air to flow around and heat the place. And this is the sewerage serving the whole area and this house. You can still see the ceiling of the sewerage made with 2 tiles put in this very steep angle called cappuccina, and on this one there is still the stamp with the name of the manufacturer.
Many rooms in the houses, sumptuously decorated in many cases. People would lavish money on their houses because it was very important to the elite to have people see how much they could spend on their houses. The decorations were quite permanent compared to modern standards. The floor coverings were often mosaics, very labor intensive and therefore very, very expensive kind of floor covering, but also, of course, very permanent. And it's because of the permanence that we're able to see these kinds of floor coverings, because they have remained in many cases. The wall paintings, similarly, these too were quite permanent, and for us that's good because they have remained over the centuries and we found them during excavations.
So it's Rome with the wealth, Rome with an interest in maintaining that image that reinvents itself when necessary, after a fire, after a flood, and in every case, the city is going up. And the reason for that is people wanting to occupy the same spaces for social reasons, political reasons, religious reasons, which leaves us today with all of these layers that we can then come and explore. So what the archaeologists have done here so beautifully is to show us the different layers of occupation of the road that existed right in front of us. So we have first the layer of the Porticus Minutia, which is then destroyed, and you have a roadway passing right through where there was an ancient structure. And each single layer then is cut back and beautifully rendered by the archaeologist's excavation of the different layers of existence of this road. So they're dumping in various periods, sometimes a little bit of material, sometimes a lot of debris, to raise the road level up and up and up. And then we get to the construction phase of a massive tower. And in that case, in the Renaissance times, what they're doing is dumping all kinds of debris with the cement. And at that point, they even find two massive blocks that belong to the Porticus Minutia structure. And then we go up and we have the beginnings of that later tower.
One of the latest exploration was of a well that we saw inside the Roman houses. And we asked to the archaeologist who was responsible for the area if it was explored before, and she didn't have any documents about these things. So she was very happy to let us go there. So we went there with all our gears. I went down for 7-8 meters, arrived at the bottom of the well, and I was in a gallery. This gallery was basically an aqueduct or probably a sewer. And from there is a very narrow passage that gives you the chance to go to an adjoining room, bigger room, that is full of debris and full of terracotta and pottery of all kinds and all shapes. We took all the information out with pictures. Maybe one day someone will be able to go in there and bring further on the study.
The thing I love most about exploring this underground is the idea of doing an adventurous thing, exploring something unexplored, and savoring the scent of history.
The goal of the archaeologist is to make a really substantial contribution to the field. And one way to do that is conduct an excavation in a very central area of the city of Rome and help understand the history of that area, of that site, learn more about the topography and the people that were in that particular site, what they did, and ultimately open that up to the public. And there's a lot of potential for exploration right in the heart of the city. One guideline that we're lucky enough to have is the Forma Urbis. So the Forma Urbis is a map. It's a very accurate map that's carved onto pieces of marble. And so what you have then is fragments, maybe about 10% of this incredible plan, but many of the monuments are labeled. So that's a great guideline in places like the Crypta Balbi site, where excavations are ongoing. And the space is incredible because no one has been in here since the 7th century AD until the excavations that took place just this past year. And what it has revealed to us is very tantalizing, very, very promising, because we're in one hall that continues off in various directions, plus what we have over here is a filled-in doorway, and we also have right back here another filled-in doorway. And you can even see there's a hole so we can peek inside and see that it's filled with debris and dirt and so on. So it's just a matter of going through these doors and removing the dirt and debris to get more spaces like this. And this is just a starting point for revealing an entire neighborhood of ancient Rome. And the incredible thing about this area is that we're in the middle of Centro Storico. We are in the middle of downtown Rome. And how many people know that an open space about the size of a football field is right over here? And they don't. So it's still to discover for the people that live here, the Romans, for the tourists, everybody. And what we have right over here is a wall that represents part of the remains of a church which is deconsecrated. But that church is located in the central part of this piazza. In antiquity, what was there in the central part of the piazza? We'll find out with future excavations. But right now we can hypothesize a temple, a shrine, a statue base, a fountain. Something almost certainly was there because that's what we have in all the other piazzas in Rome and in the ancient world.
Thousands of underground sites exist. New sites are discovered nearly every day. Rome's ancient challenge, then, is to balance the needs of the modern city while preserving its historical past. Look closely. The eternal city is full of examples of this, old and new, living side by side. It's the new excavations that cause the most havoc. In Rome today, archaeological finds take precedence over modern development.
That's what makes the architect pull his or her hair out, because they're so frustrated because they want to do this and progress and move forward and modernize the city, and here's a medieval house. Here is this mosaic floor. Here is this monument.
Preserving Rome's past was not always a priority. The Hypogeum of the Via Lavenza is a beautiful sanctuary adorned with frescoes and mosaics. Dating back to the 4th century, this treasure was nearly destroyed.
We have just a small portion of the Hypogeum of Via Lavenza, because unfortunately they built on top of that, and they destroyed a portion of that one. Even looking back 70 years ago, everything was destroyed. They didn't care about that things. Today, luckily, we care about, and that's why they are preserved, and we are lucky enough to see them and have a rough idea of what it was like at that time.
Rome has learned to live with its past.